Hey guys, tonight we wander into a legend that glitters brighter than any torchlight. You settle back, and before you know it, the jungle air grows heavy around you, wet with humidity and buzzing with unseen wings. Somewhere beyond the trees lies a promise so dazzling it could blind you, the fabled city of El Dorado, the city of gold. Of course, you probably won't survive long if you actually tried to find it. Between quicksand, snakes, and mosquitoes the size of small drones, explorers tended to vanish faster than your phone battery at 3%. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you're listening. I love seeing how far this little campfire of ours reaches across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Golden Dream begins with whispers, tiny, fragile stories carried from village to camp, then across oceans. You walk among early adventurers, men with rusting armor and weary eyes, hearing talk of a ruler who covered himself in powdered gold, bathing in a lake before washing it away as an offering to the gods. You feel your pulse quicken as the firelight flickers. Could such a ruler truly exist? It's a story that feels too good to ignore, the kind that makes tired men stand taller and convinces financiers to hand over dangerous amounts of silver just to fund one more voyage. Fact check for your pillow. The earliest mentions of El Dorado trace back to Spanish reports in the 16th century when conquistadors heard of a golden chief performing rituals at Lake Guatavita in Colombia. It was not originally a city, but a man, the Gilded One. And yet, as stories tend to do, this single ritual grew into an entire empire, shimmering with untold riches. One exaggeration stacked on another until a single man's ceremony became a whole city paved in treasure. You step closer to the campfire circle, listening as voices rise and fall with excitement. Imagine streets lined with gold bricks, one says. Another swears the roofs gleam like mirrors. Someone else mutters that the rivers themselves might flow with golden dust. You glance at the speaker and suppress a laugh. If gold dust floated in rivers, people would be fishing with sieves instead of rods. Still, you don't interrupt. The story is stronger when left unchallenged. And then, a quirky tidbit slides in. Not everyone thought El Dorado was in the same place. Some maps shoved it into Colombia, others hid it deep in Venezuela, and a few even placed it near the Amazon. It was like the medieval version of recalculating GPS, except your horse doesn't care, and your boots are already soaked. Historians still argue whether the legend was ever tied to a real civilization, or if it was simply a cultural game of telephone gone spectacularly wrong. The more you listen, the more you sense how fragile these dreams are. The jungle's heat presses on you, heavy as a cloak, and you realize that stories of gold are more than treasure. They're survival fuel. They keep men moving forward, deeper into vines and shadows, past the point where reason says turn back. And sometimes they keep the investors happy long enough to fund another reckless march. A man beside you scratches a crude sketch in the dirt, a city rising like sunrise itself, walls glowing, towers reaching high. You know it's a fantasy, and yet you can't help staring, wondering if the image is less about riches and more about longing for proof that somewhere in this world, perfection gleams just out of reach. Someone jokes that if the city does exist, the first person to find it better bring sunglasses. The others laugh, though their eyes betray the hunger of people who can't afford to admit the joke might be on them. And so, under the watch of fire and stars, you realize you're standing at the edge of one of history's greatest illusions. The Golden Dream has only just begun, and already it has you in its grip. You push through the jungle, and the very air seems to tighten its grip around your chest. Each step pulls you deeper into a green, so thick it swallows the horizon. Vines dangle like ropes, roots curl across the trail like sleeping serpents, and the canopy overhead strangles the sun until daylight feels like a rumor. Sweat drips down your back, mixing with dust, until your shirt could probably stand upright on its own. The explorers around you mutter half prayers, half complaints, their armor clinking at odd rhythms, like a badly tuned marching band that forgot its sheet music. The first footsteps into this wilderness are charged with both awe and dread. You pause to listen. Parrots screech in the distance, unseen insects sing with mechanical persistence, and every so often, branches crack beneath something heavier than you want to think about. You might tell yourself it's just a tapir, but deep down, you picture jaguars prowling silently, golden eyes blinking like coins in the shadows. The irony isn't lost on you. You're here for gold, but the jungle's eyes gleam brighter. A fact to ground this sweaty march. Many expeditions into South America in the 1500s did exactly what you're imagining, trudging through unforgiving jungle, driven by dreams of wealth. Chroniclers describe entire groups vanishing, not from dramatic battles, but from exhaustion, disease, and terrain that seemed designed to undo human ambition. The Amazon basin, in particular, became both lure and trap for those hoping El Dorado would appear just around the next bend. You push on, swinging a machete through thick undergrowth, and stumble across a stream. Its surface glitters in the light, and for a breathless second, your heart leaps. Gold? You kneel, scoop a handful, and watch it trickle between your fingers. But no, it's mica, a flaky mineral that sparkles convincingly but won't buy you even a crust of bread. You shake your head. That was the jungle's first practical joke, and you just fell for it. Somewhere behind you, a soldier chuckles and mutters, "Don't spend it all at once." Curiously enough, mica wasn't the only trick nature played. Travelers often reported seeing golden lakes or silver rivers that shimmered under certain angles of sunlight. These illusions fueled rumors, and by the time word reached Europe, shimmering reflections had turned into shimmering treasure. Historians still argue whether these visual tricks were innocent misinterpretations or deliberate exaggerations meant to lure more investment into impossible quests. Night descends fast in the jungle. One moment you're squinting at the leaves ahead, the next, the whole world is a black curtain pierced by insect song. Fires are lit, hammocks slung, and the circle of men around you looks more haunted than heroic. Someone cracks a joke about giant mosquitoes forming unions and demanding blood quotas. Laughter ripples, shaky but real, because sometimes humor is the only weapon left against a wilderness that feels infinite. You lie back in the hammock, staring upward where the canopy parts just enough to reveal a few stubborn stars. And in that space between exhaustion and hope, you think about what drives these men forward. Is it gold? Yes. Is it greed? Certainly. But maybe beneath all that, it's the desire for something extraordinary, something that makes the misery worth it. The forest sighs around you, branches creaking like old ships, frogs croaking with voices deeper than seems possible. You realize that stepping into this jungle is not just a physical act. It's entering a stage where legends are born and swallowed whole. Each footstep you take is another gamble against odds stacked high and wet and full of teeth. You drift to sleep with the faint smell of smoke clinging to your clothes, your mind already halfway to a city that may never exist, but feels close enough to touch in your dreams. The march continues, and with it comes the fever, not of illness at first, but of obsession. You glance around at the men beside you, faces streaked with sweat and mud, eyes sharp and hungry. Their talk grows louder with every mile, and the word oro passes from tongue to tongue like a sacred chant. Gold. Always gold. For the Spanish conquistadors who roamed these forests, the search for El Dorado was more than a dream. It was destiny wrapped in glitter. Armor clinks as if applauding the greed that drives them forward. You can almost feel the way ambition gnaws at their ribs. Many of these men had left Spain with promises of fortune, glory, and titles. Some had seen others rise from nobodies to governors, simply by plundering a rich city. And so, each rumor of a golden kingdom was enough to redraw entire maps. If someone whispered that treasure lay in the north, suddenly every boot turned that way. If tomorrow a rumor claimed it was east, you'd see lines of weary soldiers hacking through fresh thickets, as though yesterday's suffering never happened. Here's a clear fact for your campfire. Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada, a Spanish conquistador, led one of the first major expeditions in the 1530s into what is now Colombia. Though battered by hardship, his stories of indigenous rituals near Lake Guatavita fed the frenzy that grew into the legend of El Dorado. Spain's empire stretched wide, but its heart pulsed to the rhythm of rumors like these. Still, the fever isn't purely rational. You hear one soldier mutter that perhaps the gold is guarded by spirits who test only the bravest. Another insists he heard of a city with walls so bright they blinded intruders, and only those pure of heart could enter. You smirk at the idea. If purity of heart is the entry fee, this entire camp is bankrupt. And yet, there are curiosities. One fringe story whispers that conquistadors believed El Dorado might not be a city at all, but a pathway into another world, a mystical realm beneath lakes or hidden inside mountains. Imagine trekking for months, only to discover your directions lead straight into a riddle. Historians still argue whether the Spanish took such tales literally, or if they used them as excuses when expeditions failed. After all, it's easier to say the city was hidden by spirits than to admit we got lost. Days pass, and the fever grows hotter, supplies dwindle, armor rusts, horses stumble. But still, the men press on, driven by visions of crowns heavy with gems and palaces where gold plates serve even the simplest meals. You almost hear the ghostly clinking of coins in the air, like a lullaby for the greedy. At camp one evening, the commander unrolls a map so patched and smudged it looks like a toddler's finger painting. With great seriousness, he points to a spot in the jungle and declares, "Here, this must be it." The men nod, not because they believe, but because belief is easier than despair. Someone jokes that at this rate, El Dorado is probably located just past the world's largest mosquito nest. The laughter is thin, but it keeps the shadows at bay. The fever of the conquistadors is contagious, and you feel it creeping into your own thoughts. What if the city does exist? What if tomorrow's march reveals golden walls gleaming beneath the vines? You know better, but the possibility is just strong enough to pull you forward, step by aching step. And so, through sweat, mud, and the echo of promises, you walk on, one more soul caught in the gilded delirium of El Dorado. You arrive at a clearing where the forest relaxes its shoulders, and houses of wood and thatch breathe in the afternoon warmth. Smoke rises in calm ribbons from cooking fires, and children chase each other with the same focus you've seen in treasure hunters. Except their prize is laughter, not bullion. Bracelets glint on wrists, nose ornaments shine with soft luster, and you realize at once that gold here does not shout, it hums. When the first elders greet you, the language folds like a river, tonal, textured, patient. Your interpreter leans in, listening hard, then turns your way and offers a translation that feels about 3 sizes too small for what you just heard. You sit in the shade and share gifts, because gifts are how new paths get built. The elders touch the beads and mirrors you've brought with polite surprise. Apparently you've arrived carrying enough trinkets to open a traveling gift shop. An old story begins to unwind, unhurried as smoke. It speaks of a leader who becomes covered in the sun and steps into a sacred lake while the people sing. Your interpreter squints at a word that might mean dust, might mean pollen, might mean light itself. You nod like you understand 97% of this, which is generous. A plain fact to hold steady in your hands. Among the Muisca of the Colombian Andes, sacred lakes, especially Lake Guatavita, were places of offerings, and Spanish chroniclers recorded rituals where the new ruler, the Zipa, presented gold and gems to the waters. Gold, for these communities, carried spiritual significance more than monetary value. It was a bridge to the divine, not a bank account with good interest. You feel the meaning shift under your feet. To them, gold is sunlight you can touch. The conversation winds through seasons, harvests, ceremonies. Every so often, your interpreter gestures to explain something the words can't quite carry. You get a phrase that might mean a mantle of yellow, another that could mean powdered metal, or flower dust, or simply shining skin. If you had emojis, you'd send the sparkle one and call it a day. But here, nuance matters. A word for far in this tongue might mean distance, or it might mean difficult, or it might mean, please don't go there, it's sacred and you'll regret it. The jungle is confusing, so is grammar. Stories ripple outward. One elder describes how the lake returns what it wants to keep, and keeps what it wants returned. Another mentions a canoe lined with offerings, paddled by singers whose voices soften the water. Your companions quietly convert every shimmering image into a ledger entry. You can almost hear the abacus clicking, canoe lined with offerings becomes portable vault, and sacred silence becomes concealed storage. You resist the urge to mime a gold bar and instantly lose the respect of everyone present. A curiosity floats in from the rumor stream. Some later tellings insist emeralds the size of small eggs were tossed into the lake, and a few fringe yarns claim the waters hit a stone plug at the bottom. Pull it, and the treasure drains out like soup. Historians still argue whether such tales were born from indigenous metaphors, Spanish wishful thinking, or entrepreneurial fantasies whispered by men who planned to sell shovels to the diggers. Either way, you make a mental note. If a lake has a plug, you are definitely not the person to pull it. At dusk, a young singer hums a melody that ripples like the lake itself. The elders lean closer and say that shine is not always wealth. Sometimes shine is reminder. The word for reminder lands in your ear like a soft bell. Your interpreter tries to explain. Gold is a way to remember promises to each other, to the sky, to the world that keeps you fed. You think of how quickly newcomers turn that reminder into a map with a giant X on it. There's an old ordinary joke that slips into your mind. One person's holy symbol is another person's irresistible shopping list. You walk to the water's edge with a small group at moonrise. The lake lies like a dark mirror, and the stars seem to come closer just to be admired. A woman scatters petals, a man cradles a small figurine and sets it afloat. When the figure sinks, everyone smiles, satisfied. Something was given, something was received. You notice that no one measures the gift, no one writes anything down. The silence around the act says more than numbers could. Another steady fact. By the time news of these lakes reached European courts, the story had already stretched. El Dorado, meaning the gilded one, shifted in meaning from a person to a place, then to any place. Colombia in one retelling, Venezuela in another, the Amazon in yet another. Each retelling wasn't simply mistranslation, it was recalibration to match the listener's hope. Maps grew arrows like vines. Translation, hiccups, multiply. You ask how long it takes to reach a certain valley where the sun rests, and the elder replies with a span of songs rather than miles. Your interpreter converts songs into days with the confidence of a mathematician guessing a cookie recipe. When someone says the route is guarded, they might mean it is steep or sacred, or that a specific animal lives there and should be respected. Your companions write, armed fortress, probable bullion. A breeze lifts, and with it the scent of wood smoke and roasted maize. Everyone relaxes. An elder asks why you want so much of one color of metal when there are so many other beautiful things. It's a sincere question, not a rebuke. You try to answer and discover you don't have a graceful explanation, just a list of words, empire, ledger, honor, debt, that sound heavy here. To lighten the mood, you joke that you're collecting all shades of yellow for a fashion experiment. The elder laughs and taps your sleeve. Start with patience, it looks good on everyone. By firelight, accounts are traded. Your group tells of distant seas where ships swarm like dragonflies, of cities where rooftops press together like scales. The elders listen, smiling at the parts that sound like fables. You realize both sides are doing the same thing, turning complex worlds into stories that can be carried in the mouth. There's no malice in it, just the limits of breath and memory. Another curiosity glints at the edge of the talk. A traveler swears he once saw a leader step into the water shimmering from head to toe, as if pollen had turned to metal on his skin. Was it gold dust or ritual paint or light scattered through steam? Historians still argue whether any witness saw such a moment firsthand, or whether the image is a perfect storm of reverence, poetry, and later amplification. You look at the lake and think how easy it would be to believe anything that beautiful. When the gathering ends, someone presses a small hammered ornament into your palm, a bird no bigger than your thumb. It's not payment, it's kinship. You close your fingers around it and feel how warm it is, how carefully made. For a second, you imagine multiplying it by thousands, piling it into chests, stacking it into rooms, but the image collapses under its own weight. The bird belongs to a story, not a vault. You return to your hammock thinking that misunderstandings are not always mistakes. Sometimes they are bridges that wobble, then hold. Gold, lake, song. 3 words that anyone can say, but no 2 tongues mean quite the same thing. Somewhere behind you, laughter rises over a joke you didn't catch, and you're oddly grateful. If legends are born from gaps, then tonight you walked along the fertile edge of one. Morning mist curls like smoke across the lake, and you step closer to hear the story that has already taken on a life larger than its teller. The air carries a hush, as if waiting for ritual. In the clearing, a figure stands with skin gleaming as though the sun itself has been crushed and dusted over his body. Every movement throws off sparks of gold, dazzling and unreal, like a walking sunrise. This is no ordinary tale. It is the moment that transforms El Dorado from a man into a myth. You watch as attendants scatter more of the dust, and the figure shines brighter until he almost ceases to be human. He boards a raft woven of reeds, steady and calm, and floats toward the center of the sacred water. The crowd breathes together, 1,000 chests rising and falling as if the entire valley is one body. At the center, he dips, washing the glitter away, offering it back to the lake. A shout rises, not of greed, but of reverence. To them, this is no bank transaction. It is a covenant with the divine. Historical anchor. Spanish chroniclers recorded that the Muisca people in Colombia performed coronation rituals at Lake Guatavita. The new ruler, the Zipa, would be covered in gold dust before immersing in the waters, while treasures were cast into the depths as offerings. That ceremony is widely seen as the root of the El Dorado legend. It was never about stockpiling treasure. It was about renewing harmony between leader, people, and gods. Of course, once word reached Europe, the subtlety evaporated faster than sweat in the tropics. The Golden Man became a golden city, then an entire golden kingdom. "Did you hear?" someone in Seville might have whispered. "They don't just dust the king, they build his palace from it." By the time the rumors circled across the Atlantic again, El Dorado had bloomed into something so exaggerated it made fairy tales look like field reports. Here's a quirky tidbit. Centuries later, in the 1800s, engineers actually tried draining Lake Guatavita to get at the supposed treasure on the bottom. They dug a massive trench, the water lowered, and the muddy sides collapsed, taking workers and machinery with it. In the end, a few golden trinkets surfaced, but not enough to buy even a modest hacienda. The idea that a lake could be emptied like a bathtub turned out to be less genius and more swamp slapstick. As you stand at the shore, you realize how one ritual, sincere and sacred, could so easily mutate into an empire-sized misunderstanding. You hear a conquistador mutter that if the ruler bathes in gold dust once, surely he must do it every week. Another speculates that the entire lake floor must be lined with treasure. You want to interrupt and explain that ritual is not the same as inventory management, but you bite your tongue. Myths are resilient, partly because no one wants to ruin the mood. A question lingers in the air. Historians still argue whether anyone actually witnessed the full ceremony as described, or if the Golden Man is a stitched-together image from fragments of rituals, half understood by outsiders desperate for drama. Maybe the ritual was simpler. Maybe it was entirely symbolic. Or maybe it did happen in dazzling reality, and those who saw it couldn't resist inflating the glow until it blinded the world. Night returns, and with it comes campfire banter. Someone jokes that if the lake really contains centuries of treasure, the fish down there must be the richest in the hemisphere. Another insists the gold dust would make for excellent sunscreen. A third proposes bottling the sacred waters and selling them back in Spain as golden elixir. Laughter rings through the jungle, the kind of laughter that masks both fatigue and desperation. You close your eyes and picture the man shimmering on the raft, gold melting away into black water. Was he truly covered in treasure or simply painted in light? Did anyone in that crowd imagine that his private communion with the gods would fuel centuries of quests, wars, and deaths? The lake holds its secrets still, and you sense that no map, no trench, no greedy hand will ever coax all of them to the surface. You rest with that thought, realizing that legends don't need to be true to change the world. They only need to shine long enough for people to chase. The trail darkens again, and this time the weight of the jungle presses heavier than before. You march with men whose boots are fraying, whose packs are nearly empty, and whose eyes are glazed with a strange mixture of faith and exhaustion. Each step feels like a wager. Will it lead to glittering streets or to nothing at all? History shows the odds were rarely kind. You recall a blunt fact to ground the night's story. Dozens of expeditions into South America during the 16th and 17th centuries simply disappeared. Names were recorded on departure lists in Spain or Bogota, and then never again. Letters never arrived, no treasure ships docked, no bones returned. The jungle ate them whole. Some succumbed to fever, some to hunger, others to terrain that felt designed to humiliate steel and ambition alike. The path ahead sinks into swamps, and men drag themselves ankle-deep, cursing in voices too hoarse to carry much anger. The sound of insects grows louder, like static turned up by an unseen hand. At night, when hammocks sway above the mud, whispers run through the camp. Some claim to hear bells in the distance, others see phantom lights. You know it's fatigue and fever, but when the shadows lean in, logic feels like a frail shield. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Later, European rumors insisted that some lost expeditions had stumbled onto El Dorado but refused to return, choosing instead to live forever among golden temples. Of course, that's one way to explain why no one came back. "Why face creditors when you can live in a palace?" one of your companions jokes. It earns a tired laugh, though most men know the truth is less glamorous. Still, doubt gnaws. Historians still argue whether some of these expeditions were poorly planned from the start or whether they were sabotaged by rival factions hoping to claim glory themselves. Was it incompetence, bad luck, or treachery that erased entire groups? The jungle itself never offers testimony. One evening, your group pauses in a rare clearing. The commander insists they are close. He always insists that. He gestures toward a distant ridge and declares that beyond it lies a valley rich with metal where roofs gleam under the sun. You glance at the map and notice it's been patched so many times the ink looks like spider webs. In the corner, someone has doodled what looks suspiciously like a treasure chest with rays beaming out. The cartography is questionable, but the optimism is impressive. The ridge climb nearly breaks the party. Men stagger, armor scraping against stone, lungs wheezing in the wet air. At the top, you expect to see a shining city sprawled below. Instead, you see more forest, endless, rolling green, swallowing every horizon. A silence drops, heavier than words. One man mutters, "Maybe it's invisible," which sparks a brittle laugh. Someone else quips that the city must be hiding until it hears their credit scores improve. At camp that night, the mood sours. Rations are thin, water is murky, and the commander refuses to admit defeat. He speaks of tomorrow as if it owes him gold, as if destiny itself has signed a contract. The men nod but secretly glance at each other. Loyalty bends when stomachs grow hollow. You stretch in your hammock, staring at stars barely visible through shifting leaves. You imagine the countless boots that have pressed into this soil, the countless eyes that have squinted through the same dark. Most never reached a city of gold, but every step they took hammered the legend deeper into the world's imagination. The night air cools, and for a moment, it feels like the jungle exhales. You think about how fragile human ambition is compared to vines that can crush stone. These expeditions that vanish into green are not failures alone. They are reminders. The city doesn't have to exist for the search to matter. Still, as sleep tugs at you, you can't help but wonder. Tomorrow, when the sun rises, will this trail finally break into light or simply fold back into shadow once more? Dawn floats in on mist, and with it the sound of a wide current breathing. You break through the last tangle of vines, and there it is. Water, not a friendly stream, but a moving road, broad as a field and patient as a cat. The men around you stare like sailors who've somehow found the ocean on top of a mountain. Someone jokes that at least the bugs won't follow you onto the river. A mosquito immediately lands on his nose as if to say, "We have a boat too." The laughter is small but real, a match struck in damp air. You lash logs, plane boards, and stitch a hull out of sweat and stubbornness. Oars bite the water. The current catches your craft and pulls, a firm hand at the small of your back. You've been walking for weeks. Now the river walks you. The banks slide by, walls of green, curtains of shadow, while the surface glints with fragments of sky. The men settle into a rhythm. Pull, breathe, pull, breathe. The jungle's chorus fades behind you, replaced by the endless hush of moving water and the soft clunk of wood against wood. Here's a clean anchor in the middle of all this drift. In 1542, Francisco de Orellana completed the first known navigation of the Amazon River, starting from the Andean side and riding its waters all the way to the Atlantic. He had set out with Gonzalo Pizarro, chasing spice and rumor, cinnamon valleys and golden valleys, then split with a small force to keep searching downstream. That crossing, so improbable it felt like a dare, turned a line of blue on a map into a road through the heart of a continent. You pass mouths of tributaries that open like polite invitations you really shouldn't accept. The men eat carefully, thin broth, roasted fish, rare fruit that looks like it might either nourish you or turn you into a cautionary tale. When the wind shifts, you smell rain miles away, like fresh stone and far-off thunder. Someone asks how long the river is. A veteran stares at the water and says, "Longer than your patience." Another adds that a river this vast probably has its own time zone, maybe two. You decide not to ask about return trips. Rivers, like conversations, rarely offer an undo button. Villages appear and vanish along the banks, hints of gardens, lines of canoes, watchful faces under feathered crowns. Gifts are exchanged when meetings are friendly. Fast paddling happens when they are not. You notice fields that look planned, fish weirs that show engineering, smoke that rises in orderly threads. Orellana's notaries later wrote of populous settlements strung along the river like beads, an observation long dismissed as bragging and slowly revived by evidence. Historians still argue whether those first reports exaggerated or whether later centuries simply forgot how many people a forest could hold when it was shaped by careful hands. Night on the river has its own grammar. The current thickens, frogs call from reeds, and the stars look like scattered embers floating high and cold. Stories circle in low voices. One boatman says the water is a serpent, treat it well, and it carries you, anger it, and it coils. Another says the river is a mirror that shows you who you really are, which makes several men stare very hard at their oars. You lie back and watch constellations drift with you, as if the sky has agreed to be your map, provided you don't expect directions. A curious, fringe-leaning tale skims by like a river dolphin. Orellana's party claimed to have battled bands of women warriors who fought with piercing skill, echoing the Greek myth of the Amazons. The name Amazon, Amazonas, stuck to the river after those reports. Whether it was a misreading of alliances, a misunderstanding of roles in battle, or a glorified campfire story, the image of arrow-sure women on the water has stayed in the legend like a bright thread. You picture their canoes slicing through moonlight and decide you'd prefer to resolve any differences by exchanging baskets of fruit and compliments about paddling technique. Days lengthen into something like forever. Sandbars snag you, eddies spin you, storms flatten the river into hammered pewter. The boats creak like old knees. When rain sheets down, you huddle under cloaks and listen to the drumbeat on wood, counting heartbeats until the sky runs out of water. The compass grows moody, and the maps are more suggestion than promise. One man claims he can smell the sea, another says he can taste cinnamon, which earns a chorus of theatrical eye rolls. If the jungle was an endless wall, the river is an endless hallway with a door that keeps walking backward. You trade again, shells, beads, iron tools for food and guidance. Sometimes you're welcomed, sometimes you're warned away with sharp gestures that translate universally. You try to make your face look kind, which is difficult when you are sunburned, bearded, and dressed in what appears to be historical baking sheets. A child on a bank waves, a grandmother laughs at your hat, a dog barks like it has strong opinions about Europeans. You wave back and feel the distance between boats and shore shrink to the size of a smile. Food runs thin, then thinner. Leather becomes chewable philosophy. The river gives fish but not always enough, and your dreams turn into menus. Still, the current holds you, steady as breath. The men begin to believe in the river's intention, as if it has decided to escort you, like a stern aunt who doesn't approve of your life choices but will see you safely home anyway. You whisper thanks to the water and promise to complain less about damp socks. At a long bend, wind slaps the boat sideways and sends spray into your face. You taste the faintest change, less green, more salt, as if the ocean has started sending postcards. Birds wheel overhead that you don't recognize, and the horizon seems wider, brighter, like the world is leaning forward to watch what happens next. You're almost afraid to hope, because hope weighs as much as armor when it gets soaked. The mainstream fact returns to steady you. Orellana's descent proved the river's continuity to the sea, a single artery running from mountains to ocean. His men, ragged and astonished, slipped out into Atlantic swells at last, and the impossible became a line in a report, a thing that could be named, measured, argued over, dreamed on. The river did not yield a shining city, but it offered a passage so grand, it felt like a myth pretending to be geography. And yet the questions keep paddling alongside. Historians still argue whether Orellana's chronicles embellished the scale of riverine societies, whether later disease and disruption erased what he saw, or whether both can be true. Vibrant worlds recorded in a moment just before the great unmaking. The water does not answer, only goes on, because that is what rivers do. They take stories in, carry them, and set them down somewhere else in a different shape. When the night is quiet and the oars rest, you let your hand trail in the dark current. It is cool, patient, immense. You think of all the maps this journey will redraw, of all the hearts it will ignite with new kinds of hunger. A crewmate nudges you and says, if the river is this long, the sea must be huge. You nod and say you hope it has room for a very tired boat and an even more tired dream. He snorts and says he'll settle for dry socks and a bowl of anything that isn't imaginary cinnamon. Morning will come, the current will keep its promise, and the river without end will teach you the most generous lesson of all. Not every road leads to treasure, but some roads are treasures because they lead on and on and on. The river empties behind you, leaving the salty taste of triumph mixed with disappointment. No golden towers rise from the mud, no jeweled palaces wait in the mangroves. Still, the story survives, sharper than ever, carried back across the Atlantic in letters and rumors. Months later, you find yourself in England, where the air smells of wood smoke and ambition, and one man's obsession with El Dorado shines brighter than his armor. Sir Walter Raleigh. You walk alongside him through the candlelit halls of his London home. Maps unfurl across oak tables, ink-stained and scarred by the pressure of elbows. Raleigh leans in with the fire of a gambler who refuses to fold. He insists the Golden City lies not in Colombia nor in Brazil, but in Guyana, hidden in valleys beyond rivers no Spaniard had yet tamed. His voice is so persuasive you half expect a gilded skyline to glow outside the window. A fact anchors the candlelight. Raleigh did indeed lead expeditions in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, convinced El Dorado lay along the Orinoco River in present-day Venezuela and Guyana. He wrote a flamboyant book, The Discovery of Guyana, 1596, that painted vivid portraits of treasure-rich lands. His words ignited imaginations, securing royal attention and financial backers eager for England to rival Spain in golden conquests. But Raleigh's obsession has edges. He glosses over the hardships, downplays the failures, and magnifies every shimmer of quartz into mountains of gold. You remember standing in the jungle where Micah tricked your eyes, and you want to tap his shoulder and say, "Sir, that's shiny rock, not a retirement plan." Yet he pushes on, pen scribbling, voice rising, until the myth becomes theater and the audience willingly buys a ticket. A quirky tidbit sneaks in. Raleigh, ever the salesman, even suggested that golden statues and glittering temples might be just around the bend of the Orinoco. His descriptions were so convincing that later English readers believed he had practically walked through El Dorado's gates. Never mind that he brought back no such treasure. Words, it turned out, were wealth enough to buy another voyage. Still, the doubts creep in like drafts under a door. Historians still argue whether Raleigh believed his own claims or whether he inflated them as propaganda to gain support from Queen Elizabeth and, later, King James. Was he blinded by myth, or did he knowingly peddle illusion? The line between faith and fraud wavers in the flicker of his quill. You journey with him across the Atlantic again, sails snapping and decks groaning. The Orinoco rises ahead, vast and brown, flanked by cliffs that glow copper at sunset. Raleigh's men row, stumble, and curse through rapids, their hopes lashed to the promise of golden walls beyond the next curve. Each bend reveals more forest, more river, more silence. A soldier mutters that El Dorado must be shy, hiding until it knows your credit history. Another grins and says, "Maybe it wants a dramatic entrance." Laughter rattles down the boats, brittle but necessary. Villages appear along the banks, their people cautious, their words misunderstood. Gifts pass back and forth, but suspicion lingers in the air like humidity. Stories are shared, half heard, half translated. You catch fragments of rivers that shine, hills that hide brightness, rulers who wear the sun. Raleigh's eyes widen at every phrase, converting metaphors into maps, metaphysics into manifest destiny. You almost admire the audacity. Almost. Nights on the Orinoco stretch long. The men huddle under makeshift shelters, swatting at clouds of insects, gnawing on meager rations. Raleigh paces, restless, murmuring to himself, sketching towers and plazas no one else can see. He insists the city is just ahead, though the jungle offers only owls and shadows. One soldier whispers that if the city were real, surely it would have better signage. Days grind on, the expedition falters, supplies vanish, men desert, and still Raleigh refuses to yield, his faith glowing hotter than any torch. You follow him deeper, sensing that the Golden City lives not in soil, but in his skull, a mirage sustained by sheer willpower. When the voyage finally ends, the treasure is as absent as ever. Yet back in England, Raleigh writes as though he has touched its very gates. The myth swells larger, buoyed by his prose, until it no longer matters whether the city exists. It lives in minds, in maps, in speeches, in songs. And you, trudging out of the jungle with Raleigh, realize that sometimes the most powerful cities are the ones built from words, not stone. Back in Europe, the jungle has faded, but the stories have only grown louder. You sit at a long oak table in a drafty chamber where cartographers bend over parchment, quills scratching like restless insects. Candles drip, ink pools, and across each sheet, the new world takes on impossible shapes. The men lean in, brows furrowed, yet their eyes sparkle, because here, imagination can redraw the world with a flick of the wrist. The maps spread before you are part geography, part wish list. The mountains are taller, the rivers straighter, and somewhere beyond a swirl of jungle, a circle gleams. Manoa, one map declares, the supposed capital of El Dorado. Another shows an entire inland sea, conveniently filled with gold-bearing islands. You cough politely and ask if anyone's actually been there. The cartographer waves you off. Details, details. Maps, after all, aren't proof, they're persuasion. A solid fact for your midnight walk. Renaissance and early modern maps often included places that were speculative or outright mythical, based on rumor, second-hand tales, or political hopes. El Dorado frequently appeared on these charts, sometimes as a city, sometimes as a lake, other times as a sprawling kingdom. These images gave the legend a strange kind of reality. If it's on the map, surely it must exist, right? One cartographer dips his pen, muttering that he'll just put the Golden City near the source of a river. Which river? He shrugs. Geography is flexible when gold is involved. Another insists it should be drawn with towers for emphasis. You lean closer and notice the towers look suspiciously like chess pieces. Yes, he says gravely, because the city is the king. You bite back a laugh, deciding not to explain how chess actually works. A quirky tidbit. Some maps even included little illustrations of men covered in gold dust, as if tour guides had been doodled into the margins. These images were not just decoration, they were advertisements. Investors studying them might feel their hearts beat faster, ready to stake money on expeditions. After all, if a map shows a golden capital, who wants to be the fool who ignored it? Still, debate simmers beneath the quills. Historians still argue whether these cartographers truly believed in what they were drawing or whether they knowingly played along with myth for political and economic reasons. Were they sincere, or were they salesmen? You lean back in your chair, listening to the scratch of pens, and wonder how many fortunes were gambled on cities that lived only in ink. Night deepens. Candles flicker. One cartographer jokes that if they just keep drawing El Dorado in different places, Eventually an explorer will find it, if only by accident. Another quips that the city moves every time you look away, like a particularly expensive game of hide and seek. The laughter rolls through the chamber, though underneath it lies the serious hum of ambition. You gaze down at the finished parchment. The rivers twist like snakes, mountains rise like teeth, and in the middle, a golden city gleams in miniature. You know it's a fantasy, but you also feel the tug, the irresistible lure of a place that could rewrite your life. Maps don't just record the world, they create reasons to chase it. And as the cartographers pack away their tools, you feel the myth tightening its hold again. The ink dries, the paper curls, and somewhere between fact and faith, El Dorado shines a little brighter, waiting on the edge of the known world. You lean over the map table, and the lines almost tremble with potential. Across Europe, whispers grow into a roar. Not just Spain, not just England. Every court and coffeehouse hums with talk of untold riches. El Dorado becomes less a place than a fever passed from mouth to mouth, stronger than any illness, hungrier than any winter. The gold rush of imagination sweeps over the continent. Merchants pause in their counting houses, wondering if their ledgers might soon glow brighter. Sailors on leave boast that they'll sign up for the next voyage, already picturing themselves draped in chains heavy with coins. Even poets take their turn, weaving verses about palaces where light never dies because the walls themselves shine. You chuckle to yourself. It seems even iambic pentameter is not immune to greed. Here's a fact to steady the glitter. By the late 1500s and into the 1600s, the legend of El Dorado had become so widespread that it influenced colonial strategies, funding decisions, and national rivalries. Expeditions were launched not just from Spain, but also from England, the Netherlands, and even Germany, each hoping to outshine the others by claiming a golden kingdom. The myth itself was shaping real-world politics. In taverns, the talk is wilder still. A drunkard insists that in El Dorado, people eat from plates of gold and use emeralds as toothpicks. Someone else swears they've heard of golden parrots that sing hymns in Latin. You raise an eyebrow, sipping your watered wine, and wonder how many parrots had to go to seminary for that gig. A quirky tidbit emerges in the chaos. Some investors sold everything, land, homes, even titles, just to fund expeditions to South America. They believed the payoff would be so immense it would make kings look poor. Some returned with nothing but mosquito bites, while others never returned at all. The frenzy wasn't just adventurous, it was ruinous. You can't help but imagine the awkward conversations back home. So where's the fortune? Well, darling, I did find a rock shaped like a chicken. And beneath the laughter, the doubts remain. Historians still argue whether the expansion of the myth was a collective misunderstanding of indigenous rituals, or whether Europeans deliberately inflated the legend to justify colonial ventures. Was El Dorado a mistake, or was it a marketing strategy? The line is as thin as parchment. Still, the fire spreads. Ships depart from Seville and Lisbon, sails full of wind and ambition. Pamphlets circulate, each one promising that the Golden City is closer than ever. Children play at explorers, drawing little maps in the dust, while their parents dream of fortunes that could lift entire families into nobility. You realize the legend isn't just reshaping geography, it's reshaping hope itself. At night, you sit by the hearth listening to friends argue. One says El Dorado must be hidden because the gods wish to test human perseverance. Another insists it's punishment for greed, that the city vanishes whenever someone gets too close. A third grins and says maybe it's just waiting until someone invents GPS. The laughter echoes, but the longing behind it is real. The gold rush of imagination leaves its mark, deeper than any shovel. It fuels wars, funds voyages, ruins households, and crowns others. And as you close your eyes, you see how powerful a city can be, even if it never existed, when the human heart insists it must. The farther you march, the clearer it becomes. The jungle is not a stage for your ambitions, it is the lead actor, and you are an underpaid extra. Vines lash across your face, branches claw at your arms, and every patch of ground seems to have a personal vendetta against your boots. You swat mosquitoes that sound like tiny warplanes and slap your neck so often you're not sure whether you're fighting insects or rehearsing a bad percussion solo. Each expedition carries the same mistake, the assumption that nature will bend to human will. Instead, the jungle grins and shrugs, saying, "Good luck with that, amigo." Men sink into bogs up to their waists, horses flounder until they look more like soggy statues than steeds, and supplies mold faster than you can chew them. You wonder if the city of gold isn't hidden, it's just laughing too hard to show itself. A sober fact anchors your march. Countless expeditions into the Orinoco and Amazon basins ended not with glorious discovery, but with starvation, disease, or simple surrender. Tropical fevers like malaria and yellow fever decimated crews, while rains destroyed equipment. The jungle itself often proved more lethal than any imagined guardian of El Dorado. At night, fires struggle against the wet air. Smoke hangs low, clinging to your skin like an extra layer of sweat. Men grumble in voices thick with doubt. One mutters that the jungle is alive and plotting against them. Another insists the parrots are mocking him personally. A third solemnly declares that if he ever sees another root vegetable, he will duel it. The laughter is weary but real, a last defense against despair. Quirky tidbit for the weary traveler. Some chroniclers tell of explorers who reported trees so large they thought they'd found the pillars of a hidden temple, or frogs whose croaks sounded like church bells. Others swore they saw flashes of golden light in the undergrowth, only to discover beetles with shells that gleamed under firelight. Imagine risking your life for months only to find your treasure crawling away on 6 legs. Historians still argue whether nature's obstacles were underestimated due to arrogance, or whether the men knew the risks but pressed on anyway, blinded by the promise of gold. Was it ignorance, or was it sheer stubbornness? The line between the two grows as blurry as your sweat-stung eyes. One evening, rain crashes down so suddenly it feels like the sky has dropped a bucket on your head. The camp dissolves into chaos. Fires hiss out, hammocks sag, and the mud swallows gear with gleeful slurps. When the storm finally eases, one soldier mutters, "If El Dorado exists, I hope it has better roofing." Another sighs and says he'd settle for a decent pair of socks. You chuckle, though your own feet squelch miserably in your boots. As you lie awake, the jungle's chorus rises. Frogs bellow, insects buzz, leaves drip endlessly. The sound is so constant it stops feeling like noise and becomes a kind of music, a reminder that you're the intruder here. You realize the city of gold may not be hiding at all. It may simply never have existed, and the jungle is the only empire that rules these lands. Still, when dawn breaks and the mist curls upward like a curtain, the commander declares, as always, that the city lies just ahead. You tighten your pack, grip your blade, and step once more into the green cathedral, where dreams of treasure shrink beneath roots older than any map. You keep walking, and the strangest thing begins to happen. The city of gold refuses to stay still. One night, it's whispered to be hidden in the mountains near Lake Guatavita. The next morning, someone swears it lies beyond the Orinoco. And by sundown, a scout insists it must shimmer somewhere deep in the Amazon basin. El Dorado shifts like smoke in your hands, a mirage that redraws itself with every retelling. A firm fact to anchor the haze. The term El Dorado originally meant the gilded one, a ruler dusted in gold during sacred rituals. Over time, the meaning slid from man to ritual to city to empire. By the 17th century, it had become less a place than a flexible dream. Each explorer placed it just beyond the edge of their own failures, as though it existed always one valley further. At camp, you listen to soldiers trading stories like gamblers with shifting dice. One man insists the city was swallowed by a lake, its rooftops visible only when the moonlight tilts just right. Another claims it is guarded by spirits who move it whenever greedy men draw near. A third declares, with drunken conviction, that the city simply flies away at the sound of Europeans arguing. You can't help but laugh. El Dorado is the world's first low-budget UFO. Quirky tidbit. Some maps from the 1600s placed El Dorado smack in the middle of a giant inland sea that didn't exist, called Lake Parime. Explorers spent decades searching for this phantom lake, which cartographers happily drew and redrew even as expeditions failed to find it. By the 1800s, surveyors confirmed no such lake existed. It was a geographic illusion kept alive by stubborn optimism and some very enthusiastic doodlers. Historians still argue whether explorers truly believed these shifting locations or whether moving the city was a clever excuse for failure. After all, if you didn't find it, clearly you just hadn't looked in the new right place. Hope is easier to preserve when your goal is allowed to run laps around you. The jungle doesn't mind your confusion. It keeps reshaping itself with storms, floods, and growth so quick that a trail cut yesterday looks ancient today. In such a world, it almost makes sense for a city to move, to slip from sight like an animal in the underbrush. You glance into the trees and half expect to catch a glimpse of golden walls sliding quietly into the shadows. Around the fire, a soldier sighs, "If the city keeps moving, maybe it doesn't want to be found." Another retorts, "Or maybe it's just playing hard to get." Laughter follows, thin but necessary, as the men chew their meager rations and dream of palaces that shift like chess pieces across an unseen board. By dawn, your commander points to yet another horizon, declaring with absolute certainty that this is the true direction. You shoulder your pack, roll your eyes, and follow anyway. Because in a world where the city of gold moves each time you get close, hope is the only compass you have left. You keep walking, and then the ground under your boots tilts, time slides, and the jungle thins into tarps, stakes, and the soft whir of generators. Centuries fold along old creases, and you step into a different kind of search. Archaeologists with flashlights, tripods, and patience chasing echoes instead of headlines. Someone hands you paper booties for your shoes. You look down at your mud-streaked leggings and joke that field fashion is swamp chic. The graduate students give you a thumbs up. Approval from people who name their trowels means you've arrived. They lead you past screen tables where soil rains through mesh in a gentle hiss, and every clink in the tray below gets the kind of attention a jeweler gives a diamond. A drone lifts from a gap in the canopy, humming like an ambitious mosquito. Hanging under its belly is a LiDAR scanner, sweeping the forest with light and bringing back shapes the leaves have hidden. On the laptop, the green dissolves and geometry appears, straight ditches, leveled platforms, and long, narrow causeways that stitch wet places into walkable networks. The myth once promised one blinding crown. The scan reveals a patient quilt. A plain, steady anchor lives behind glass as well as in the dirt. In 1969, near Pasca, Colombia, a small golden figurine, now called the Muisca raft, was discovered and later placed in Bogotá's Gold Museum. It shows a ruler on a raft surrounded by attendants, a miniature that matches Spanish descriptions of a lake ritual. That object does not prove a city of gold, it proves a ceremony existed, gold as sun, offering, and promise. You lean close to a photo of the raft and feel a whole legend concentrate into something you could balance on your palm. Out in the low forest, trowels move like careful commas. Archaeology tiptoes where conquest once stomped. A student hands you a shard of pottery the color of toast. Your thumb finds the curve that used to be a bull's lip, and for a second, the present unwraps. You hear a spoon clink, smell cassava, feel heat from a hearth. The student grins and says, "Archaeology is 90% waiting, 9% labeling, and 1% whoa." You tell them that sounds exactly like your inbox. They appreciate the solidarity. Another mainstream lesson now fits in one pocketable sentence. Over the last 2 decades, aerial and ground surveys have revealed large, organized settlements, causeways, and earthworks in parts of Amazonia and its margins, challenging the old idea that the rainforest was an untouched, thinly peopled wilderness. The picture emerging isn't one megacity, but many communities braided by water and paths, adapted to seasons, soils, and belief. The shine here is not in bars, but in design. A curious tidbit drifts through the tents like a gossiping breeze. Modern treasure hunters still test their luck at Lake Guatavita with metal detectors, homemade dredges, and confidence levels not supported by physics. Some report that their compasses spin or that the lake sings at night. Rangers remain unmoved, detectors are confiscated, and the only song reliably recorded is wind in reeds with the occasional disappointed sigh. If there's a drain plug at the bottom, it has dodged centuries of enthusiastic plumbing. Night folds in, and headlamps bob through the dark like tame fireflies. Around the cook tent, the crew trades the day's small victories. Someone admits they bagged a bone that turned out to be a very persuasive root. Another confesses that an eerie grid on a LiDAR strip was just the plane's shadow acting like an architect. You bite into a fried plantain and decide the jungle still plays jokes. Science just writes them down with better punctuation. You kneel at the edge of a square test pit, its walls neat as a slice of cake. Layers stack, leaf litter, charcoal flecks, pottery crumbs, a bead the size of a raindrop. It isn't gold, it's fired clay, glazed by river minerals until it catches your headlamp like a tiny sunrise. The supervisor murmurs context with the reverence of someone greeting an old friend. That's the quiet revolution, where the old hunts lunged for metal, the new ones trust place, sequence, and the slow arithmetic of soil. Back in town, museum cases hum with filtered air and feet. Families drift until they find the Muisca raft. The room goes hush in that particular way people get when an object feels both tiny and vast. A child asks if the raft sailed to a city of gold. The guide smiles and says it sailed to the center of a promise. The child nods, satisfied. You nod, too. The story is not smaller, it is sharper. At a folding table, a senior researcher flips a notebook smudged with sunblock and optimism. She points to a pitted metal disc. Nailhead, colonial, probably from a barrel hoop. The object looks modest, but it has a lot to say about trade, storage, timing, and hands. Not every glint is a clue. Not every clue glints. The fever that once tossed nails aside would have missed the shipment behind the shine. A fringe-leaning rumor pokes its head in like a curious capybara. Online sleuths post satellite screenshots of golden squares in remote clearings, convinced they've found palaces. Most turn out to be sunlit cattle pens, or the way a cloud decided to complement a field. Still, the impulse is familiar. A pixel-age Raleigh selling tickets to the next bend of a digital river. You wish them good snacks for their expedition from couch to fridge. The survey crew returns, and the monitor blossoms again with pale lines, canals stitched to plazas, causeways braided across seasonal lagoons. A young researcher tilts their head and says the pattern looks city-ish, but gardened. Historians still argue whether these landscapes deserve the label city by old-world yardsticks, or whether we should learn a different word that can hold plazas and orchards together without forcing them to pick a side. You like the debate. It leaves room for places to be themselves. You try on a set of headphones attached to a core or rig, and the soil thumps softly in your ears as the tube sinks, like listening to a book being shelved one page at a time. A tech shows you flecks of ancient charcoal trapped in a layer that dates to centuries before any conquistador's bootprint. It's the opposite of spectacle, yet it lands with more weight than rumor. You think of how many fires fed families, prayers, gossip, songs, and how none of that fits on a treasure ledger. Lunch is rice, beans, and a tomato that looks like it fought a vine and lost honorably. Someone asks what you expected to find, and you say, a city. They point at the pits, the canals on the map, the bead in your sketchbook. You did, they say. You're just measuring it in centimeters. Another jokes that archaeology is the world's most polite heist. We steal secrets from dirt and then publish the confession. You raise your cup and toast to slow crimes. By late afternoon, the river throws back the sun in sheets of bright metal, and you grin at the old trick. The water is not gold, but it plays one on TV. In the distance, a line of palms marks an ancient causeway, and a small rise hides a plaza where feet once danced and promises were spoken. A ruler once stepped into a lake glittering like dawn. You stand on a terrace built for ordinary afternoons, and it feels just as grand. Evening drapes itself over the camp. The radio crackles with weather rumors and a panpipe version of a pop song that somehow makes everyone work 2% faster. You help bag the day's sherds, scribble unit numbers, and heroically avoid dropping the clipboard into a pit. Today. You settle into your sleeping bag between crates of labeled soil and think about the new treasure you've been collecting. Alignment, inference, patience. You are still searching for a city, but your definition has learned how to breathe. It has kitchens and footpaths, drains and orchards, songs and seasons. If there is gold here, it's beaten impossibly thin across memory, bright enough to catch in a headlamp, gentle enough to let you sleep. The camp is quiet tonight, except for the soft rasp of crickets and the faint sigh of the river. You lie on your back, staring at the stars, and realize the legend of El Dorado has become less about geography and more about psychology. The maps, the expeditions, the speeches, all of them were chasing something glimmering inside the human chest, as much as in the jungle. A grounding fact to steady your thoughts. Across centuries, El Dorado inspired hundreds of expeditions, consumed fortunes, and reshaped European and American ideas of exploration. Yet, no golden city was ever found. What survived instead was the hunger itself, transferred from one generation to the next, a tale too shiny to put down. The whispers of soldiers, conquistadors, merchants, and even poets still echo in your head. For some, El Dorado was a literal city. For others, it was a metaphor, an unreachable ideal, a shimmering stand-in for whatever they most longed for. The word itself has entered languages worldwide as shorthand for paradise of riches. You shake your head at the irony. The richest treasure the legend ever produced was the word itself, a quirky tidbit. During the California gold rush of the 1800s, the term El Dorado was slapped on everything: hotels, saloons, even a brand of whiskey. The Golden City may never have been located in South America, but it managed to set up shop on signboards across the Wild West. Imagine walking into a dusty saloon and ordering 2 fingers of El Dorado, only to discover it burns more like regret than treasure. And beneath the laughter, the serious question remains. Historians still argue whether the legend of El Dorado should be viewed as a cultural misunderstanding, a deliberate manipulation by explorers, or simply a universal story humans keep retelling because it scratches a deep itch. Maybe it's all three. Myths rarely settle into a single box. They prefer to sprawl across categories like cats on warm laundry. You turn onto your side and think about what gold really meant to the Muisca, who dusted their leaders not for greed, but for devotion. To them, gold was light, a fragment of the sun, a way of balancing relationships with gods and waters. To outsiders, it became coin, empire, profit. Perhaps the truest tragedy of El Dorado is not that it never existed, but that what it symbolized was mistranslated into greed. The jungle hums around you. A soldier snores. Somewhere in the distance, a frog bellows with comic determination. You smile at the absurdity. 3 jokes in one. The frog sounds like a broken trumpet, the snores match its rhythm, and together they're performing the world's least lucrative duet. Even here, with dreams collapsing under damp canvas, you find yourself laughing. The myth of El Dorado endures because it is not only about wealth, it is about longing. Longing for a place where the ordinary rules break, where something dazzling waits just ahead. That longing survives failure, mocks skepticism, and outlives reason. You breathe slowly, letting the truth sink in. People don't chase gold because they need it. They chase it because they need the dream. And in that realization, you drift towards sleep, the hum of insects and the hush of water folding into your heartbeat. The Golden City shimmers still, not on any map, but in the shadows of desire where myths are minted. The fire has burned low, and the jungle air feels softer now, less like a challenge and more like a lull. You sit with the thought that the search is ending, not with a fanfare of trumpets, but with the quiet rustle of leaves. El Dorado, the city of gold that drove men to march, paddle, and vanish, remains unfound. Yet somehow it has outlived every conquistador, every mapmaker, every dreamer who once swore they were close. The plainest fact of all rests heavy and clear. There was never a city of gold in the Americas. No gleaming towers, no golden streets, no palaces crusted in emeralds. What existed were rituals of offering, sacred lakes, ornaments hammered from sunlight, and societies whose brilliance lay not in hoarded treasure, but in the balance they struck with the world around them. The conquistadors came searching for vaults. What they trampled over were gardens. And yet, the story shines. A quirky tidbit illustrates just how enduring it became. In the 20th century, Hollywood resurrected El Dorado as a backdrop for swashbuckling adventure films, complete with improbable temples and curses. Toy companies later churned out El Dorado board games, where players raced to claim golden idols. The city may never have existed, but it has been rebuilt countless times in theaters, living rooms, and imaginations. The myth, unlike the expeditions, never dies of fever. But there's always a question flickering at the edge of your thoughts. Historians still argue whether the legend should be mourned as a colossal waste of life and resources, or cherished as a symbol of humanity's restless spirit. Was it folly, or was it faith? Did it reveal the worst of greed, or the best of hope? The debate has no end, and maybe that's the point. You picture again the man dusted in gold at Lake Guatavita, shimmering in ritual light before stepping into the water. That image, half history, half poetry, sparked centuries of pursuit. Perhaps the real city of gold was never meant to be built from stone. Perhaps it was always a city of longing, shimmering wherever humans dare to want more than they can touch. The myth endures because it reflects us back to ourselves, our hunger, our imagination, our flaws, and our faith. El Dorado never was, but it always is, a reminder that some dreams glow brightest precisely because they are unreachable. And now, as the journey quiets, you feel the world loosen around you. The torches burn low, the maps fold closed, and the heavy boots of conquistadors fade into silence. What lingers is only the breath of the jungle and the hush of water against stone. You lie back, letting the air cool your skin, and it feels as though the earth itself exhales, forgiving the noise of centuries. The city of gold has dissolved into stories, and those stories now soften, becoming something gentler than ambition. They are not shouts of conquest anymore, but whispers of memory, a lullaby about human hope. The golden walls have become starlight, scattered above you. The treasure is no longer weight in your hands, but calm in your chest. You close your eyes and drift across the river that never ends, carried not by oars but by breath. Each stroke of current is slower, softer, until time itself forgets to hurry. The myth that once blazed hot with greed now glimmers cool, like moonlight, across still water. You no longer need to chase it. You only need to rest in its glow. The city was never found, but the dream remains, and tonight it does not demand pursuit. Tonight, it simply keeps you company, a lantern glowing quietly on the edge of sleep. So let your breathing fall into rhythm, steady and slow. Let your muscles loosen, your thoughts grow lighter. The Golden City can wait. It always has, it always will. And in this moment, it asks nothing more than for you to rest. Sweet dreams.